Well, welcome to the 700 Club. The carnage has begun. More than 100 dead already slaughtered during Turkey's invasion of Syria. This desperate plea to President Trump established a no-fly zone over northeast Syria or expect a tremendous massacre. Chris Mitchell has more of the details on this surging crisis.
Turkish forces and its ally, the Free Syrian Army, are attacking Syrian Democratic Forces for the second day. Air attacks, shelling, and Turkish ground troops are advancing into territory controlled by the U.S.'s main ally in the battle against ISIS. The large-scale operation is coming just days after President Trump announced he would pull U.S. troops from the area. Most observers felt it gave Turkey a green light. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo refuted that claim.
Well, that's just false. The United States didn't give Turkey a green light.
Yet the fighting puts Christians in the crossfire. CBN News interviewed Pastor Zani Bakr of the Church of the Brethren in Kobani on the Turkish-Syrian border earlier this year. Wednesday night, he issued this plea just after his wife Chinar and child fled for their lives.
There is fear and panic among the people. Most of the people left. My family and the families of the believers left. The men only stayed in Kobani. We are waiting and praying to see what God would do till tomorrow morning. We're asking God for the nations to intervene and for the UN Security Council to stop this war.
The Syriac Christians of northeast Syria released this statement pleading with President Trump to establish a no-fly zone over northeast Syria and not to let Christianity be driven out of the area. They issued the following warning. When Turkey invades, it will include all the major cities housing Christians and Kurds along the Kurdish border. This invasion will include Turkish troops and their mercenaries, such as the so-called Free Syrian Army, and a massacre will happen on a larger scale than what happened in Afrin. In Afrin last year, the Free Syrian Army, a jihadist group, destroyed churches and hunted down Christians and ethnically cleansed hundreds of thousands of Kurds. The White House said that Turkey has committed to protecting civilians, protecting religious minorities, including Christians, and ensuring no humanitarian crisis takes place. Despite Turkey's commitment, observers say a humanitarian crisis is already underway. Christians are not being protected, and civilians are being indiscriminately bombed.
CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now from Jerusalem. The Syrian Democratic Forces are threatening to surrender Syrian President Assad. What would that mean to the region?
Well, Pat, that would turn the region whole upside down. What that would mean is the Assad regime would come in to take over this area, northeast Syria. The Russians would come in. Worst of all, Pat, it would look like the Iranians would come in as well. This would also quench what has become a really democratic, representative form of government there in the region. And I think part of what we're seeing right now is President Erdogan is being about a bully. He's actually threatened the European Union. He's going to release 3.6 million refugees to Europe. And I've talked to one Syrian official who said, you know, what comes next? Could he go after the Kurdish regional government there in northern Iraq? So it's a very dire situation, as you mentioned, Pat, about this no-fly zone. That is critical, from what I understand, to stem the tide of this Turkish invasion. That's what people are looking for as just the first step to reverse what's happening right now.
The Kurds were our loyal allies. The Peshmerga were with us from the very day we moved into Iraq. And have we abandoned them? Is that what you read?
That's exactly what seems to be happening. That's exactly, Pat, what we were hearing several months ago when President Trump first made his decision to pull U.S. troops. Don't abandon us. And this has happened historically. You know, there's a proverb from the Kurds that say, we have no friends except the mountains. That's because they've been betrayed over and over, unfortunately and tragically, many times by the United States. This seems to be one of the worst betrayals right now. I have heard anecdotally that some of the U.S. troops that are in there, that it's gut-wrenching for them. They're standing by while seeing the allies that they've worked with for several years fighting the battle against ISIS being slaughtered and having attacked a NATO army against what is basically a very vibrant militia, but nothing to be able to stand against a NATO army with air power, with tanks, with the kind of forces they have. So yes, Pat, it looks like that right now, so far, that the U.S. has abandoned, turned its back on the Kurdish people.
Well, there are at least 100,000 Christians. What's going to happen to them?
Well, they're in peril, as we saw. You know, we talked to this pastor, Zani Baker from Kobani. We broke bread with him not too long ago, Pat, earlier in this year. And right now we're hearing that at 4 p.m. local time, Kobani, where we talked to him last night, will be under attack. So they are under a threat. You know, the security zone that Erdogan talks about, he calls it a terror zone. That's where most of the Christians live, about 100,000 of them on the Turkish-Syrian border. And as they talked to us months ago, they're terrified. We could hear that on the phone last night. His wife, Chinar, the pastor, his wife and baby had to flee. And, Pat, one historical context here, many of the people that fled the Armenian genocide about 100 years ago fled to this portion of Syria. So these are many of the grandchildren, great-grandchildren of people who fled the Ottoman Empire's Armenian genocide. Now they feel like they're in the thumb of this neo-Ottoman Empire, President Erdogan, who's trying to attack these people and ethnically cleanse them once again from this region.
Chris, what were they saying in the mosques? That Muhammad is back. Would you tell us what they're preaching to these troops as they go into this battle?
Pat, that's such an important point to make right now. This is not just sort of a campaign against what they call terrorists. This is in many ways a jihad. The director of the Turkish Religious Affairs is asking today in the mosques of Turkey, about 84,000 of them, to pray from Surah number 8 in the Quran, conquest prayers. And as we've reported before, there's a pro-Erdogan newspaper that said to go tell the unbelievers that the army of Muhammad is coming. They see this as a jihad. This is not just a campaign to take away a terrorist haven, as it were. This is a jihad against the unbelievers, including the Christians, Yazidis, and the Kurds. And so that's what we're witnessing right now.
The Iranians want a clear path all the way to the Mediterranean. Is this going to give them what they're looking for?
Very much so. In fact, if the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, do surrender to the Assad regime, that opens the door, worst of all, to the Iranians. It would help them build their bridge all the way from Tehran to the Mediterranean. It would put them much closer here to Israel. And Israel is taking note of this as well. And they're thinking, well, if the United States won't back their main ally, the Kurds, and also remember, Pat, on September 14th, there was an attack against Saudi Arabia with no military response by either Saudi Arabia or the U.S. They're seeing this as the United States being weak in the region. When people are weak in the Middle East, the other strong people take advantage of that. That's what President Erdogan is doing right now. And that's why Israel is paying attention to what's happening and why it's so critical to be praying for what's happening in this region.
Chris, fabulous. Please keep coming back. I love your reports. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a tragedy that's taking place before our eyes. You know, the United States is not a reliable ally any longer for anybody. And that's a terrible thing to have said about your nation. Well, the fallout from this invasion is certainly being felt in the nation's capital. Our chief political correspondent, David Brody, is joining us now from Washington. David, what do you hear from the people who are talking about this, the evangelicals particularly?
Well, Pat, there are a couple things going on. First of all, one conservative evangelical leader close to the White House just telling me this morning that this is a crisis of biblical proportions. He talks about Russia, Iran, Syria, the conflicts that we have now going on in a very unstable part of the world in the Middle East. You put it all together, and there's a lot of concern. And that has been pretty much the solid concern among evangelical leaders throughout all of my discussions. Now, having said that, You have the evangelicals, so to speak, that 81% that voted for Trump in 2016. They seem to still be with him. Are they happy with what's going on right now in Syria? No. But they're also willing, it seems, not just anecdotally, but also on Twitter and some other social media outlets that I have been on and talking to them, they seem willing to give this president the benefit of the doubt for now. Here's the problem. A PR disaster is potentially in the making, and a visual one. And you know Donald Trump doesn't like bad visuals. And we could be getting bad visuals already, obviously, coming out of that northeastern part of Syria. And that's not good for this president.
I talked to Senator Graham, and he wants to be on this show. He was with me yesterday. We talked at length. He is really exercised because he has been there with the Kurds. He's been to Erbil. He's been to the Kirkuk oil fields. He knows exactly what's going on. And he is very vocal against the president in this move.
That's right. As a matter of fact, he even came out yesterday and said this move puts the nation America, at risk, and also puts this presidency at risk. I mean, that's how bad this move could be. Now, Lindsey Graham, along with a Democrat, Chris Van Hollen, and the Senate are working on a sanctions bill. They introduced it. We'll see how that goes. A source on the Hill just talking to me this morning and basically saying that they're not quite sure how quickly that sanctions bill against Turkey will go in terms of it has to get through the Senate, of course, the House. And then the thought is, like conventional wisdom, is that the president would not sign a sanctions bill against Turkey right now, that he would veto it. But this source, very close to Lindsey Graham's office, I can tell you this, says, wait a minute, the president actually could sign that sanctions bill. That is not off the table. So this could get a bit more complicated as we move forward.
Thank you, David, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to show you a verse of the Bible that I think is very important in this regard. I think the president has made a major mistake. Now, here's what Ecclesiastes says, and I quote, "As dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor." Now, the president is enjoying record support among evangelicals, and this thing, as dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. I hope our dear president will take that verse to heart, because this thing is unfolding into a major humanitarian tragedy and a major black eye for the United States of America in the Middle East and throughout the world.